Hi, I'm Renee Hobbs, and welcome to the Media Education Lab's webinar series. Today, I am really delighted to see so many of you joining us. I'm very excited about today's presentation and discussion featuring Rob Greco. We're going to be considering media literacy role in policy, standards, and assessment in the personalized learning era. And Brian Jennings, welcome. We're glad you're here. I see Gail Dessler, my old friend from California. Hi, Gail.
Hi, Renee.
Welcome, Vera, Lucia, Viera. Mike, I see you. Denise, Pamela, Joyce, Yanti. We're really glad you're here. Before we turn it over to Mike, I invite you to use the cool, Mike will take your screen sharing away now for a second. Will you do that? There you go. So now you might be able to see the gallery view up at the top corner. See how you can change from speaker view to gallery view? Let's go around the room and introduce ourselves, shall we? Because like any good seminar, our discussion will be more meaningful and robust if we know who's in the room and what we're all contributing to our discussion. Joyce, I will throw it to you. Will you introduce yourself to us, please? I'm so glad to see you.
It's great to see you too, friend. How are you doing?
Good. Happy now.
Good. I'm Joyce Valenza. I'm going to say hi, Mike. It's great to see you again, too. Hi, Gail. So I'm an assistant professor at Rutgers University, where I work with our grad students, preparing them for jobs where they're going to be leading cultures of all sorts of literacies. And I'm a former school librarian and educator. So nice to be here.
Wonderful. Let's turn it over to Brian Jennings. Brian, will you introduce yourself to us? Up, sound. Unmute. Not yet. Still can't hear you. Why can I not hear you? There. Brian, we're going to come back to you.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Hold on.
Okay.
Do I hear you? Okay. No, I don't. Yanti, can we turn it over to you now while we will figure out why we can't get Brian's sound to work?
Sure, no problem.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Plugged in a microphone for this. So I'm Brian Jennings. I am the Library and Media Specialist at Narragansett Elementary School. I do a lot of work with media literacy. I wrote a few books, 4 children's books about it, and I'm going to be starting as a media literacy communicator, Bri the Media Lit Guy, in the next couple of months.
Bri the Media Lit Guy, we're so glad you're here. Yanti, you're next.
Hi, Yanti Frism. I'm the Associate Director of the Media Education Lab. I'm now in Columbia College, Chicago. Going to direct their new MA program in civic media that's going to start in the spring. Working in media production and interested in how can we support teachers teaching media production.
Wonderful. Pam Stager, you're next.
Hi, I'm Pam, Providence, Rhode Island. I'm a media ed labster, senior writer and researcher there. And I'm also directing the Media Literacy Now Rhode Island campaign to try and get Rhode Island Department of Ed to integrate media literacy into their state standards and curriculum. So I'm very interested in this webinar.
Wonderful. Jen Robinson.
Hello, I am Jen Robinson, and I work at Thompson Middle School in Newport, Rhode Island as the teacher librarian, and I'm working on a second master's degree as an English language arts teacher as well. So I have varied interests, but many involved in media literacy, and I'm part of the Media Ed Lab as well.
Gail Dessler.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great, perfect. Hi, I'm a teacher in the Elk Grove School District. That's in the South Sacramento area. It's actually the largest public school in Northern California. And I also co-direct our district's digital citizenship program. And my trainings and meetings with Renee have always played a big part. You know, copyright fair use, pieces that I've been pulling for a long time. This year, or actually I shouldn't say this year, I should say since 2016, we've really been looking at media literacy and how that fits into our digital citizenship program. And we realize now that's the big piece, and everything else fits within it.
Haha, fascinating. Looking forward to hearing more about that. Denise, introduce yourself to us, please.
Sure. I'm a 7th grade English teacher in a small town outside of Buffalo, New York. I'm a doctoral student at the University of Buffalo. I'm actually in the process of writing my dissertation as we speak. It's on new literacies, media literacy. So I thought this would be hugely important. I'm looking at the connection between standards and the New York State 3rd to 8th grade ELA assessment is ungodly. So I'm hoping to shed some light on that in my work.
Wow. Wow. We're so happy you're here. That's
Thanks.
awesome. Liz Azarki, I see you're here. Can you introduce yourself to us, please?
Hey, I have to get my thing.
We can hear you though. You don't have to, you can choose whether you want to be visible or not in this thing.
You can hear me?
We can hear you well.
Wow. I was going to put my headset on. Okay.
It's all right. You're fine.
Okay. I didn't know I had an input without my headset. So hi everyone. I'm here in New Jersey, Kidsbridge Tolerance Center, and we teach media literacy. Lately been teaching memes and have worked with Mr. Yanti Friesem on media literacy and memes and showing evidence-based that we can teach children to be more empathetic.
Wow, wonderful. Glad you're here. Vera, Lucia, Viera, can you introduce yourself to us, please?
Yes, for sure. Are you hearing me? Yes?
Yes, I can hear you.
Not sure if you are seeing me, but anyway. I am an information professional from São Paulo, Brazil. Yes. And I'm also, kisses for you too. And I'm also a Portuguese and French teacher and very interested in media and information literacy. That's it. That's why I'm here. And I love what you write. I follow you on social media. That's why I'm here.
Yeah, we are thrilled to have you because you help us to be a global learning community. So welcome. And finally, Cassandra, can you introduce yourself to us now, please?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I forgot my headset. Okay, great. So I recently obtained an education technology certification from Rutgers University here in New Jersey. My long-term goal is to develop programs and partnerships with teachers and nonprofit organizations. Self-directed learning for young people, and I feel media is something they use already, and using it with some more like academic rigor is something I would like to participate in long-term. So I came across you, Renee, a couple of months ago while doing research for one of my multimedia courses. So I've been following you, and I thought this would be a great opportunity just to learn more, expand my research.
Wonderful. We are really glad you have joined us. And like, look around the room. If we were at an academic conference and this constellation of talent showed up, we would be thrilled. Right? So we're very fortunate to have Mike Rob Greco join us this hour. I think the plan is he's going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a conversation to respond and react and ask questions to what he has to say. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike Rob Greco. I guess he needs no introduction except by way of saying that he's the author of a great new book that's coming out in just a few months called, what's it called, Mike?
Making Media Literacy in America.
The first ever scholarly history of media literacy. So he's a historian, he's an English teacher, he's a talented curriculum specialist and expert in media literacy. And right now he's also playing the role of being an administrator at a small school district in southeastern Vermont. Mike, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I am coming to you from Vermont. The size of our school, our supervisory union in Wyndham Southwest, was it Gail? Who's from, who's from Sacramento. I grew up in Baltimore, so I'm well aware of and cut my teeth in Philadelphia with the Media Education Lab during my doctoral studies. So I know these differences in scale. I was recently in Florida and saw on the news a superintendent switching districts to go to a smaller place that was 130,000 students. We have under 900 in 5 schools. So it's pretty amazingly different in rural Vermont, where I am. The thing that may not be different is the challenges that are presented by the various new initiatives in school reform that are around all over the nation in the United States right now, and that I seldom see and had no practice when I started this 3 years ago, and all of these initiatives became law and new mandates in Vermont. I didn't know how to connect media literacy to them, had no practice with that, and I seldom see that conversation. So that's why I also am desperately wanting to reconnect with all of you. So those pieces of being overwhelmed with my current position as a director of curriculum and technology integration for 5 schools, middle, high school, and an elementary school, and 3 small K-8 schools, has brought me to want to talk about these, and really to sort of introduce them, but these initiatives, and think about ways we might connect to them, but also really try to get some help and get some ideas for how to move with these initiatives, if that's something that we think is worthwhile and wise to do. So let me share my screen now, and I'll bring you through if I can figure out where it is. Oh, here it is.
And while Mike's putting on his screen share, I'm just reminding you, if you look in the chat button, you can access his slides through Google Slides that way. He's also displaying them on the screen now. Great, Mike, thanks.
Yep, and the slides in Google Slides are enabled for comments if you want to make a comment directly on a slide, so that people can see it later. This will stay up on the lab website, I assume, on this page, and be accessible there so people will be able to see your ideas as well. Today, I want to address this question of how media literacy can fit into current school reform initiatives. And I'm probably going to be one of those more frustrating, if you're expecting a presenter with a lot of answers, I'll be frustrating. What I'm trying to do is frame some of the ideas, see how widespread they are, see if anybody's been working on them, and share a few ideas that I've had, but also some frustrations that I've had and some challenges that I've noticed in these initiatives. Proficiency-based learning, is this coming up on everybody's screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Which confusingly also gets acronymed with PBL, which is project-based learning as well. But it's also the same thing as competency-based learning, and it has sometimes is the same and sometimes is different from standards-based learning, and is an outgrowth of the historical mastery learning movement that started in the 70s. Personalized learning is also connected with personalized learning plans. In some states, individualized learning or individualized learning plans. It means a whole lot of different things, which we'll talk about. And multi-tiered systems of support, which is ways that a bunch of states now are moving towards thinking about supporting struggling learners. And today's outcomes, I'd like to identify and introduce these major reform initiatives, and then share and brainstorm emerging strategies to address them for media literacy advocates. What we're not going to focus on today are the usual paths and allies for media literacy in technology integration, library media, through digital citizenship, information literacy, makerspaces, coding, web and app design, video production, student journalism. All of these things are super important avenues, obviously, for us to tap into, but we seldom consider these larger system shifts from which those things are. And I'm really excited about media literacy now in the various legislative that Pam mentioned, legislative initiatives that have passed and are going through Congress in various states. But those sorts of same new curricular mandates, I come up against it with my health teachers all the time. We have health mandates that are seldom, complied with because there's not oversight and accountability on those. There is now in several states on these other initiatives, and when that kind of teeth starts to come in, that's when we know we have to deal with those initiatives in order to get our foot really in the door. So my sort of working thesis for this webinar is that advocacy for integrating media literacy education in K-12 schools will be more effective with strategic approaches for addressing school reform initiatives. So for proficiency-based learning, there's some significant changes in curriculum where everything now is shifting towards standards-based proficiencies and competencies in every content area, and then transferable skills is what they're called in Vermont. I'll be interested to hear if you have versions of this. Really, they mirror the 21st century skills that were articulated a decade ago or so, and shared across the country. But that's how curriculum is now being organized. And for assessment, there's a major shift towards not averaging anything. Like, you can't average homework and classwork and papers and types of performances together the way that we used to build syllabi that had percentages for each of those things, or even percentages for types of topics. And so instead you're rating whether a learner has achieved proficiency or is progressing towards proficiency or has exceeded it in much more discrete skills or areas of knowledge. And grades then become the only thing that you report are summative grades. The formative grades and how you get to that proficiency are communication usually between you and the learners along the way. There's separate work habits we're separating academic performance from work habits, from habits of mind, from collaboration. Those sorts of things are discrete. Many places and many schools are still reporting on those, but sometimes we use a different scale. We use a frequency scale to assess and report on those. But they're always in best practices for proficiency-based learning separated. I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable. Is that true?
No, it's okay for me.
I'm good?
Yeah.
Okay. In instruction, and this is where things are very variable right now. Students work, in theory, this system is supposed to open up possibilities for students to work on their own at their own pace, and to introduce the possibility for multiple ways of learning and demonstrating new knowledge and skills. So multiple pathways within the instructional design. And one of the bigger challenges for teachers making this shift is the idea of multiple attempts, that there's no failure, it's always not yet, which sometimes makes endpoint, and when am I going to find time to meaningfully reteach these things, a question that stays in the air. So the challenges to the system, or the significant changes in the system, include this idea that there's no credits anymore. There's no credit for seat time. They're trying to get away from the old, the people call it the factory model of seat time, and instead learners advance at their pace when they're ready to take on the next learning unit. They advance when they demonstrate proficiency. So that's like the big ideas. Then the complications come around grain size issues with proficiencies, and I'll talk about that a little more with the next slide. And then overloading of accounting for proficiencies with these bigger graduation proficiencies than performance indicators chopped up beneath that, and learning targets then at the day-to-day classroom level, and different systems for having to account for all of that. This quandary about student motivation with unlimited makeups and tries, a focus on teacher pace and coverage, and then what we're finding, this focus on teacher pace or coverage, I mean, the purpose is to allow students to work at their own pace, to open up more opportunity to work at your own pace, to move on when ready, to get more intense instruction if you're struggling. But in some schools, there's suddenly emerged this, are you teacher pace or faster? Then you can move on. Or do you need intervention? And it's not exactly coming out how I see it envisioned in a lot of places. And there's also a focus on covering. Are we covering, students and teachers, all the proficiencies that we're going to need to move on to other courses? And this is especially in the secondary levels and middle school levels. And then finally, there's emerging complications around teacher pace. I mean, around hybrid systems of proficiency and traditional assessment. So that idea of not averaging and GPAs going away isn't happening in a lot of places. So we're still getting in some places, reporting a proficiency assessment as well as a letter grade that averages a lot of things together. So those are some challenges. And the reason that I'm introducing these things is because I feel like as media literacy advocates, we need to understand these shifts and how significant they are for both teachers and their students, as well as the systems within that they work within. And these are just this is from Great Schools Partnership, which partners all over New England with schools, has partnered at the beginning of this shift 4 years ago in Vermont. And I just wanted to show this to get at that idea of grain size. You see in this triangle at the top, graduation standards, and they're recommending 5 to 8 standards that are transferable skills, basically, standards taught in all content areas, and recommending a body of evidence over time that shows that you can do those. That's usually going to be housed in like in a personalized learning plan or a portfolio. Then underneath that, content area graduation standards, so 5 to 8 standards in each content area, as well as these transferable cross-curricular standards. And then within that, you're getting more to course level 5 to 10 within each cross-curricular. And so start doing some math, right? We're now sort of assessing and reporting and assuring that there's proficiency in each of these necessary areas that add up to graduation standards without averaging. Okay, and then you get down, and that's all summative assessments. So those would all be, whether it's tests or projects or other performances, at the end of units of learning. Then you have your formative learning objectives and the day-to-day lessons that are also focus on. And so I also linked to a core principles if you want to get more versed in some of the lingo that goes along with this. But this is something that's happening all over the United States. So you can see that we're in the red as an advanced state, with Vermont, with New Hampshire and Maine, Vermont in the Northeast. And in most states, they're at some level of implementation with competency or proficiency-based learning. This is a slide. This is how I, a couple of years ago, when I was trying to wrap my head around it, presented it to my teachers, thinking about proficiency-based learning as good because it tries to marry equity and rigor with compassion and passion. So it tries to get at holding everyone to high standards with a growth mindset and having common, calibrated assessments, but also differentiating, offering multiple chances, offering early and targeted interventions, and then catering to learning styles and really marrying this with personalized learning, which we'll talk about in a second. This is a graphic that was developed with Up for Learning, organization that works with student-led initiatives in Vermont that we've used to communicate. And there's all these different mixed metaphors for how this is like going up a mountain on multiple paths. Some are windy, some are direct, that sort of thing. But trying to get at the idea that there's sort of stop and posts along the way, and that there's different paces and different ways of getting to the same common standards. And what this also creates is sort of a rubric mania, where this is a vertical one on the left, where most systems with proficiency go on 4 points, whether that's like an artifact of the grading scale. I would say probably it is. This you see 6 levels, but really we usually do 4 is exceeding, and so that would be these top 2 areas, and 3 would be meeting, so the third from the top, and then 2 would be not yet or progressing, and then not showing much progress is towards the bottom. But you have this other metaphor of, riding a bike. There's driver's license metaphors. There's some issues for a lot of people around those kinds of metaphors. But what I really wanted to get to today is to talk with you all about the opportunities and challenges for this, for media literacy. And one of the strongest ones is to connect to transferable skills. And I've linked to Vermont's document on transferable skills, which are clear and effective communication, self-direction, creative and practical problem solving, responsible and involved citizenship, and informed and integrative thinking. Like I said, the 21st century skills model. Also collaboration, innovation, inquiry, and use of technology are throughout everything. So those are what are thought of in Vermont as the cross-curricular skills. In most states doing this sort of learning proficiency or competency-based have some version of this. Media literacy sort of centers on a lot of those transferable skills, but one of our challenges is to know the level and style of implementation for a particular state, district, there should be a comma there, or school, and also what the local lingo is for proficiencies. So we do have an opportunity there to be a solution for how media literacy already tries to bring interdisciplinary content areas together, but through transferable skills that we've already developed, outcomes around. But we need to know how exactly those work in order to make them appealing to different localities. So we also have an opportunity to connect to specific content proficiencies. Frank Baker and some of the work at Project Look Sharp has done great stuff around connecting English and social studies standards in the C3 and in the Common Core to media literacy. I used to be on the media commission with, what are they called? What's the professional group for English teachers?
NCTE?
Yeah, NCTE, that's it. And at the time when Common Core was developing and getting adopted, we recommended that there was addendum to it that recognized text as all different media text, but it never got into the actual documents. But there are actual lots of standards within English and social studies, also in science and in health, that specifically call out different things that we would recognize as media literacy competencies. So the challenge is to design curricula for these emerging versions of PBL, right? So that goes for instruction, instructional design, and assessment design, this sort of rubric thing, and aligning with the way that rubrics work in certain localities. So all of those things, and then to try to do it in an adaptive way so that different places can pick this stuff up easily. And the other opportunity that, and I'm hoping that we can open up now for a few minutes and do it this way, like stop and talk everybody about proficiency-based learning and what you've seen and what your ideas are, before we move to personalized learning, and if we even get to the other. But proficiency-based professional development, we know from teacher education research, which I was steeped in my graduate studies because I wanted to know how to get this stuff more easily and readily into the hands of teachers in ways that they could use. We know that if you have never experienced a new practice as a learner, you're very unlikely to implement it as a teacher. You have to experience it as a learner in meaningful ways. And so there's been a movement to actually model proficiency-based learning in the professional learning field. So that is an opportunity for us to, and it's often built around these micro-credentials. But the challenge is that we need to integrate with an already overcrowded PBL system, and alignment to standards itself is not enough. We got to design to learn existing proficiencies. I'm not sure how successful we'll be adding media literacy at this time. And honestly, that's my thing now is I've been trying to advocate at my schools media literacy anywhere I can and model in various professional developments and all that, but to require something that's not really tightly married with these other initiatives when there's so many major shifts in practice is unlikely at best. So I wanted to open this up.
So Mike, I have to ask you a question. So is it that, so your school district's shift to PBL is the result of a statewide initiative? Is that you are mandated to move in this direction? Is that right?
Yes. Yes. Graduation is required to be proficiency-based by 2020 in Vermont, as well as advancement in every grade, K to 12.
Well, let's hear what I feel like. I'm dying to hear what everybody else has to say, but I guess I'm having a visceral gut reaction against PBL, right? And it comes from this idea that it seems to position teachers primarily as responsible for assessing. It seems like all of the emphasis of it is on the metrics. And I wonder, is that the heart of the innovation there, or is there something else that's really great about it
You've heard me talk for a while. Does anybody have an opinion on that?
Mike, I was wondering, is there any onus on the learner to collect artifacts of proficiency?
Yes, that's actually so the next phase of this webinar, the next 10 minutes or so, I'll talk about personalized learning. And really those things are supposed to go together. Personalized proficiency learning is what's mandated, and personalized learning plans are a key part of that. So collecting artifacts and being able to negotiate curriculum and self-advocate, and have teacher support and advocate for multiple pathways for students are all things that proficiency-based learning is supposed to enable while ensuring equity of holding kids to common high standards. I'm talking party line here. I didn't make any of this stuff up.
Because what I'm hearing is that there isn't necessarily a specific assessment that is mandated at the end of the journey when they reach the content.
Right. So Massachusetts had that, and you saw that Massachusetts is in white on that map. They're not using the same system, and they have the MTEL at the end, or is that what it's called? MCAT for students at the end of the road, and you make it or you don't, right? And as part of the end of the road. But yeah, it's locally designed, these assessments. Now there are high stakes tests, like the Smarter Balance test is one that's used in Vermont, and most states will have that as a way, usually, of assessing the schools and their quality in delivering and getting kids to proficiency. But most of those tests now use the language of proficiency. So
I'm reading this.
The results come out whether a kid is proficient or not.
Got it. I'm reading this great new book by Sonia Livingstone and Julian Sefton Green. It's called The Class. It's really a deep ethnography looking at the digital literacy practices of a group of 9th grade students in a diverse public or private high school, what are public high school in London. And she says they use proficiency-based learning there, Mike. And she says in the first chapter, she says, the kids have all learned to speak the language of minimum targets and are diligent in saying they want to do only the minimum required. That is the basically the outcome of this system, is that kids recognize the game and play the game, but that the imagined rigor has degenerated to the minimum standard. Is that a fair critique, do you think, or not?
I think it's a danger. I don't think we've been doing it long enough to know whether that's a common outcome, or whether that's just those terrible teachers at that school where they were working that did that to those poor kids. And I'm totally kidding. But I do think that that some of the other pieces to the puzzle are intended to work against that. The other piece is, I do think, actually I know that the proficiency bar is rather high. Vermont ranks in a couple different surveys in the top 3 or 5 in the nation for math and ELA achievement, yet in some cases we have less than 50% proficient in a grade for math as a state average.
You're at the top of the national list?
Yes. So these are criterion-based high stakes tests. So they have scale scores, and they have cutoffs for what they would consider proficient, or then exceeding proficient and below proficient. We look more at growth and what scale score growth is individually, try to tease that out rather than to look at those cut scores. But I do think those cut scores orient us to a high level. And I think that the standards themselves that in the Common Core, NGSS, and the new C3 and social studies are very rigorous. So yeah, I think kids are going to game the system, but that to think that that might be worse than what's going on now, I think is not probably on the right track.
Okay, so I have one more question. Sorry to take up all this space, Michael, but
yeah.
So we saw in England, not to continue the British example, we saw in England that one of the reasons why media literacy slid off the map in their K-12 education system, where media literacy used to be a big part of English education, and now it is not. Okay, it is not. And the reason why it's not is that around 2013, the conservative government started going around with a mutter brigade saying, oh, you know, media literacy is not rigorous. It's a Mickey Mouse subject. So my fear with the proficiency-based learning, if it's focused on rigor, is that media literacy practices, because they connect the classroom to culture and to popular culture, and because they respect kids' engagement with media, out-of-school media practices and media text, it'll be perceived as a soft, unrigorous part of instruction, and therefore devalued. Is that a fair critique, or could that happen with PBL as you are experiencing it?
Yeah, I think it depends on. Yeah, I think it could happen. I think it could happen, and I think that's one of the reasons that I think it's important for media literacy to work to marry with high rigorous standards that are in place within content areas, and to articulate and show models of dynamic regular practice, like for transferable skills that media literacy education produces. Like, I think those are ways that we can work with this, and if we use the system and we develop actual exemplars that are rigorous, I think it's within the community's grasp to avoid that. But I do think it's a great thing to keep in mind. Like, I would love to see that added to my notes as something to bear in mind as we try and connect with these kinds of initiatives.
Let's see if anybody has any comments or questions before we let you move on.
You know, I was just going to make a comment. You know, since the 2016 elections and the continual discussion of fake news, that's kind of reopened, I'm seeing here, an interest in media literacy, which we kind of lost sight of, I think, because we were kind of locked into teaching from publishers' curriculum. But you know, the real world requires, navigating the real world requires some media literacy skills, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that observation, Gail, about how, you know, Pearson wants to keep everything, wants to hold on to the textbook publishing model, and media literacy just isn't so simpatico with that strategy. And so that's another really interesting dynamic at work in media literacy's relationship.
Yeah. You know, and I think the other thing is, you know, the reality that it isn't just our students that need the media literacy. You know, we all need some help to step outside of our filter bubbles.
Other comments or questions?
This is Cassandra. Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
So I definitely want to comment the last point you made about how to get teachers on board. The course I took, Multimedia for Educators, our professor, she employed, I believe, a model where First, we had to get comfortable with just media in general, print, video, and audio, doing some various exercises, just us understanding what does that really mean? What is this visual literacy message that I'm compiling? What is it reflecting, and how you can play around with these design elements and design principles. And, you know, initially it was a little frustrating because you do feel like a student in unfamiliar territory, but I thought it was pretty brilliant because, you know, for the first 6 weeks, you're a mini design student. And then for the remainder of the course, you're trying to develop an educational model that you will then implement to either young adults or you know, K through 12 students. So I think having that perspective going through that as an instructor, it really informed us on how you execute these modules. We can't assume that as a digital native, they're understanding some of these design elements and principles and what they're really communicating and how they have so many more options to frame their messaging. So I feel like I felt like when I was designing my curricula, it was mostly around civic engagement. I'm involving not just the technology in the coursework, but also, you know, discussion about critical analysis. I'm incorporating some peer review, you know, based on, you know, the topic that you're interested in and what you're trying to communicate. Talk to your peers, and is that message going through? We're doing prototyping. You know, maybe that visual element you selected isn't the right element. And so it was a lot of artifacts that, not necessarily grades, that helped us to kind of frame, okay, are we moving in the right direction with this media message or these media elements, which is a little more abstract. It's, you know, it's not necessarily a number grade or a letter grade. And, you know, it takes some really thoughtful planning, I think. And I could definitely see it in theory being leveraged across like an English class, a history class, a civics class. But I am concerned, you know, teachers already have so many other obligations and administrative obligations, you know, how to kind of give them that time. Like I had a whole semester, you know, to kind of implement that. But I don't, with their other professional development responsibilities, it's difficult.
Yeah.
That is a great observation. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I really think that idea really gives an example to Mike's point about how teachers have to be learners first. They have to experience this as learners. But I wonder, it makes me think, Mike, could you help me create a proficiency-based system for the Summer Institute this summer? Right? And what would be the targets or metrics? Because maybe I do need to model it, right? And yet,
right.
So intimidating, really.
I'll show an example of something like that in a second. I want to go quickly through the personalized learning piece, because I think of all of them, to see that actually they all should go together in Vermont's model. Everybody have the screen again? So in personalized learning, the plans involve goals and action steps. And so in Vermont, personalized learning plans, and I know this is ILPs or PLPs are mandated in many states on the Eastern Seaboard. These are student-driven plans. They're supposed to be student-driven plans, different from IEPs or individual education plans under special ed, different from those sorts of plans that teachers and parents are governing. Kids make up their own goals and their action steps, and they can be personal goals, and often they'll be balanced by community goals, especially for younger kids, and older kids will recognize the requirements of the school, and the gaming comes in there, but we're trying to give time and space for kids to articulate and identify connections and create connections between curriculum and their personal interests. And those goals can be academic, extracurricular, or career oriented. Then they do a profile and learning styles, dispositions, etc. They collect artifacts to show progress, evidence in an e-portfolio, what Joyce was asking about earlier. And they do reflection upon learning. Some, you know, and it's done differently. Some teachers will connect everything they do in the classroom and have the kid like go back to their personalized learning plan. And others, it happens in like just the advisory that kids in a high school or middle school would be in once a quarter or once a semester. There's a very minimum kind of requirement. Every kid grade 7 to 12 in Vermont has to have a PLP, but it has to have required elements, but it really only needs to come out. It could be in a drawer and come out like twice a year. That's not how it's usually done. It's not how it's done in our supervisory union. It's usually done with a electronic portfolio of some sort. But personalized learning also can mean adaptive learning software, right? So it can mean IXL or Edmentum products. It can mean these different, basically very responsive worksheets. Some of them are much better than that. So that's the low end of the spectrum. But personalized learning can sometimes mean that. And sometimes it means I have a teacher that uses mostly Khan Academy for instruction and does reteaching and group instruction off of what kids are working through individually through Khan Academy. And the scores of his kids and motivation has actually gone up. So it's all surprising. But that teacher, that said, has amazing relationships with kids, goes the extra mile with lots of different kinds of kids, and posts these really cool projects to exceed proficiency that involve engineering and design challenges. So it depends on what's going on around these sort of adaptive machine learning type things. So then there's the idea of the negotiated curriculum, which can include the actual content and activities where the teacher says, we have to go towards these proficiencies and these transferable skills. But as long as we're doing something with history or something with civics in my social studies class, I'm open to suggestions. Here's some ideas I have. What are you interested in? And there's teachers who are doing this now, but it often depends on individual teachers or principal leadership as to how extensive that is. And then there's the menu of different ways to demonstrate. And this is a real opportunity through digital storytelling and different digital designs Cassandra was talking about, to offer different, in many different content areas, different ways of demonstrating whatever you've learned through media products. And the last idea that's connected to personalized learning is multiple pathways, which are mandated in Vermont. But again, this usually means you got to make sure in the secondary level that you have technical school options, AP courses, dual enrollment, virtual high school, internships, and service learning. These are mandated in a lot of states, but if we were creating, strategically creating media literacy options for this, that would be a powerful avenue. Complications in practice have to do with student readiness. When and how much are students ready at different ages to own their own learning? How motivated will they be to do so? Are they really going to let you see who they really are when they're sort of built to defy that in adolescence in some ways? How do you get buy-in and ownership of this process? And then there's the teacher implementation variance, where some teachers you'll have limited use, and some teachers will overreach and want all of the things they're interested in to show up on the kid's PLP. And you got parent involvement with too little or too much, and authentic opportunities for student plans to direct learning can sometimes be scarce. Does the structure of the school and the learning environment actually allow for this? Agency can be boxed in by common standards. Like if we're always working towards standards somebody else chose, am I really in charge of my learning? And there's equity traps. Some people have written about this. within personalized learning, if we're too personalized, then we might be not pushing kids to shared higher expectations based on biases that we don't necessarily even know that we have, right? So this is the image again from that initial professional learning that I did to introducing these initiatives in our SU. I used the Wizard of Oz, the Yellow Brick Road, and tried to get this idea that the head and the heart, it's standards-based learning is us trying to get a better brain about this, and personalized learning is us trying to have a heart about it while we do it. Opportunities and challenges are here. I see we only have 5 minutes left, and I want to hear from people, but digital storytelling in PLPs through e-portfolios comes up against the challenge of ready-made platforms and templates. So there's all these new templates for PLPs and platforms that do PLPs and don't make you actually produce media. And then adding the critical thinking elements to the production process. Yanti might have something to say about that. Digital citizenship for self-representation is something that becomes totally necessary once you start doing personalized learning and having kids using digital resources all the time. But it often gets siloed with the responsibility of the library media specialist, seeing kids once a week or when invited, with certain specialized courses, and not really owned across the whole school or all curricula. And then the ideas of negotiated curriculum run up with the challenges of PBL, and multiple pathways is another opportunity. So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully people can talk for a few minutes now about this initiative and how it should go hand in hand with proficiency-based learning. How do we fit with this?
So obviously, if you give the Wizard of Oz and you have the Scarecrow and the Tin Man, you got me. So, so just tapping into like my area of media production. So the way that I changed in the last, 5 years is talking about skills. So instead of talking about, the creativity, the playfulness, I'm saying, well, they're learning skills in each step, and I'm going like phase by phase and saying, those are the skills. This is the evaluation that the teacher can do. So I changed the whole discourse of let's have the students create something, meaningful, and saying, yes, there's the end product that will be a civic engagement, but in order for you to let them do that, here, those are the skills, those are the assessment. That's what's going to happen during the progress in order to do that, which is kind of a trade-off in a way. But I feel like for parents, for administrators, less for the students, but it's like helpful and guidelines into, okay, small steps, and I measure each one, and I know that what I'm doing is actually meaningful and not feeling that the criticism is valid, that it's not learning and it's just a general kind of thing.
So you're helping us understand that within the context of media production activities, the personalized learning and proficiency-based learning might be really suitable and appropriate for layering onto media production. That's fascinating. Other thoughts, reactions? What are the challenges and opportunities? I love the layout of the challenges and the opportunities, Mike. How can these forms of school reform help us, and why aren't they helping us more?
So I have a tie-in to some of my grade 5 instruction this year. I've gathered a group of 7 different classes of grade 5 students, and I'm looking at that personalized learning and the comment about student readiness and buy-in and ownership. I'm looking for ways to combine the personalized learning and the proficiency-based learning in a way that's meaningful and effective for my grade 5 students, because I find that they need lots and lots of direction, and at the same time I want to move them toward that independence. And I know there have been other folks in elementary grades that have done this successfully. For me, it's new, and for me, I usually work with some older students. So I see my grade 5 students struggling greatly, and I'm also running about the room because they've eliminated my clerk position. So I'm trying to be, that instructor that guides them through this wonderful process while also being a media clerk and helping them select books and run to the desk and check out books, but to try to find a way that's not just babysitting and assessment, but is meaningful for them. So this is all a very fascinating conversation for me, and I'm thinking about it greatly during my grade 5 context.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, you're talking exactly about that issue of, especially at the younger grades, elementary into early middle school, about, there needs to be a lot of scaffolding to know how to set goals, to know how to connect an interest to something you would do in school and to the idea of learning. But if you as a teacher, you're constantly aware of that struggle and that the goal is their own initiative and their own agency, their own work and their own interests, then I think you can get them. You're much more likely to get them there and prepare them for what they're likely to be asked to do in high school, and hopefully make them more excited about the process than sort of. I think it's easy to kick in your jaded self when you actually don't really know how to do it, you don't have practice, and you haven't experienced payoff from it. So if we get teachers like you doing it in the early grades effectively, then the system works where you don't get as much gamesmanship in the upper grades. So I love hearing you talk about that.
Thank you for that feedback. I'm going to move forward with all that.
Right, that's a key insight there, right? This is really a learning curve where starting in the upper elementary could really help to move the needle as it shapes expectations for learners. It's 5:02 now, and so we like to begin on time and end on time. Let's give a big round of applause to Michael Rob Greco for facilitating learning experience for us. So,
yay! Bravo! Bravo!
What I want to do is just give you a little bit of a reminder about what's coming up next. Our last Media Education Lab event of the season is coming up. And so let me see if I can I'm sharing my screen with you now. Here's where you find it. If you go to the Media Education Lab website, go under webinars. Our next one is coming up in just a couple of weeks with Ellen Reynolds. We're going to be talking about documentaries for children, very interesting genre. Not documentaries about children, but documentaries for children, where children are the target audience. This is a fascinating genre. It's not often well understood, and we're really lucky to have Ellen Reynolds, who's just finished her MFA at the New School in New York, wrote her thesis paper about this topic, and I expect we're all going to learn a lot. So, signing off here from the Media Education Lab. Thanks for joining us today. Mike, thanks for a thoughtful presentation. I hope to think a little bit more about it with you. Thanks you guys for joining us. Really great to see you.
Thank you.
Hope to hear from you soon. Bye.
That was fun.